In this week's episode, the 100th episode, I'm joined by Jessica Pettitt, she, her, author of Good Enough Now and Almost Doing Good. This week, our conversation is all about LA comedy embracing neurodiversity, Phifer shaking up employee healthcare, Microsoft getting serious about inclusive AI, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Let's get started. Jess, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. And if you listeners, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this newsletter, because if you ever need a little dose of positivity, this little email pops up in my inbox every week. And I'm like, this is great. So I highly recommend it. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks, Jess. I love talking to you. So tell us about your new book, Almost Doing Good.
So it, like all books that I have written, have been little alien babies, as if I'm Sigourney Weaver, coming out of me. And this book came out, I think, in combination of completing my MBA during COVID and really starting to do more crisis management with clients, not from external facing crises, but crises internally inside the organization that they really should have been more prepared for. I think those two things kind of clashed, and instead of committing homicide, I decided to write a book about it. So Almost Doing Good uses 25 different case studies of good intended interventions or initiatives that my clients have done that went horribly wrong, so that we can figure out why it went wrong and how it could be better.
So are you spilling the tea on what your clients' names are too? Are they coming out as having made these mistakes in the book?
I think they would know who they are, but I am protecting the innocent, largely because I'd like to stay employed. And what I really love is being a super nerd is all of my clients have approved what I have written about our experience together. And they really did learn from what they weren't paying attention to. So I think it's been a very positive experience for my clients, but there is some serious tea, truth, and honesty about the difference between almost doing good and causing more harm, and the momentum required to almost do good in the right direction, even if it fails.
I love that you're talking about mistakes. I love talking about mistakes because I think that we don't talk about them enough, and it gives other people permission to make mistakes, and it gives us a little humility, and I think it makes us all a little more human. So can you share one or two of the examples from the book just briefly?
Sure. And you can download them for free. All of the case studies are available at jesspettit.com/freebies. You can download the whole workbook if you want. I think the case studies are going to be really useful because they are all things I would do if I wasn't really thinking it all through, right? Like, they seem to make sense to do this. So one of the examples, I guess the example that really kind of kickstarted the book, there was an internal post during Pride Month inside of a global organization on their internal, like Slack, except it's not Slack, that was perceived as homophobic. And because of the time zones, it was up for 17 days before anybody responded, because the higher-uppers really, they were the original founders. It was a company of 4 people that within 3 years grew from 4 people to 18,000 people. So they hadn't really worked through that, like maybe 18,000 people don't need access to be able to email all 18,000 people at once. Maybe some safeguards there. But they also didn't even know how to use the internal system. So they were all on retreat with no internet when the original post posted. I actually believe the original poster was actually trying to start a conversation, but it was perceived as really homophobic. And then the comments and things got really hateful and violent. And queer people have different rights in different countries that are represented on the same internal communication channel. So by the time the higher ups actually figured out how to log in and do or say something, so much time had passed. The CEO actually said that episode cost them more productivity than COVID did.
Oh, wow. That is
Right.
a heck of an example. I'm sure there were some lessons learned. Probably like a book of lessons learned.
Yeah. It was intense.
Wow. Well, we're both keynote speakers, we're both writers, and in this week's 5 Things newsletter, I wrote about some keynotes I have coming up with client-facing audiences. And I have a very soft spot in my heart for client-facing teams because I've spent, my career in client-facing roles. I was a wedding planner for a long time. And obviously, as an entrepreneur, I'm client-facing. So it's something that I really love to talk about. And I would love to hear a little bit about your experience and kind of having fun how do you get the attention when you have the ability to do a keynote for client-facing teams? Sort of, what's your tip? My tip is really about understanding their motivations and bringing it back to kind curiosity and just trying to have a little bit more fun. Because I think people are walking on eggshells a lot. So, kind of, and I can talk a lot more about that, but tell me sort of what's your nugget in how you win over client-facing teams when you're doing a keynote or presentation?
Sure. I like to kind of reduce everybody down to somebody I'm likely to bump into a grocery store. So then it doesn't matter their title or their tenure. If the last keynote I did, there were 2 people in the audience who had worked for the organization for less than a week. And so how do you equalize that with everybody else who's in the room? I could bump into you in a grocery store. So by kind of removing the formalities, we can just be normal people. Mm-hmm. And then I talk about current events because it's what we're currently worried about, or like the last news story we saw or listened to before we came into the ballroom to sit down. Mm-hmm. Or we're multitasking and we just saw it on our phones. And so it's in kind of our back of our mind, but we kind of put it to the side because now we're supposed to focus on this keynoter. So I bring that front and center and then talk to normal people about normal things going on that we don't know what to do with.
I love that. I love that. All right, well, let's move into this week's Good Vibes. The first story this week comes from the LA Laugh Factory, where a comedy show made stand-up inclusive for neurodivergent audiences and even included some neurodivergent comics. So they had a chill-out space, they had lower sound levels, they allowed audience members to move or even speak freely, and all of this made the environment much more welcoming. I love this story, Jess. It's simple things.
It is simple things, and it's also free, doesn't cost anything, and it's responding. I think the story is a really great reminder that when event planners ask about accommodations, they usually don't find out how those accommodations go until after the event and a post-event survey. So I always recommend ask for the accommodations and then follow up after that first meal or the first day. How did that go? Do you need anything? Do we need any tweaks? That way you can fix it in real time, even often for free.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And don't you have a little bit of a background in comedy?
A touch. A little bit of something. Yeah. And I mean, when reading the articles about it, I actually hadn't heard about it until your newsletter. Again, a plug for the newsletter. It was fascinating to think about the culture of a stand-up place, right? Is that they're drinking weak drinks that are overpriced on wobbly tables in a dark room that you really don't want to see the carpet in real light. So then your job as the stand-up is to stand on stage and like bridge that divide of what that audience is expecting and what you're trying to do. And the idea that they could walk around or talk or not talk, even like providing headphones or something to kind of mute the ambient noise. I thought was really, really interesting. And my first response was, oh, that would never work. And that's really ableist. Like, of course it can work, because the people who need the accommodations also chose to come to the stand-up show. So now what's the meeting place in the middle? It was really intriguing. Thanks for sharing
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. I love hearing, just little things. This stuff doesn't have to be rocket science, but it does really need intention. Okay, the second story is from Phifer, a manufacturing company based in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. It has 2,000 employees, and through an on-site healthcare clinic offers free primary care, prescriptions, orthotics, and chiropractic service for its employees. So this providing this on-site healthcare has saved the company millions of dollars, which it's then reinvested in its workforce through free summer camps and scholarships. I just think this is brilliant. I mean, it solves so many problems.
It solves problems, and I live in a medical desert. So the idea that I would be able to get medical care, or foreshadowing to the next article I think you're doing about mental health care, being able to do that while at work is really a bonus, right? And so I think about some of my clients before COVID, and I even write about some of these in the book, where my like Gen Xerness kind of got tripped up when I walked into some of these companies that have like 3 meals provided, dry cleaning services, a gym, you can bring your dog to work. Like, my jadedness walked in and was just like, do you ever get to leave? And I thought these kind of services feel less trappy, like exchange your entire life force for labor, as I'm actually going to keep your life force healthy. I liked that a lot.
Yeah, I like it a lot too. And I'll tell you, don't get a lot of stories in the newsletter from manufacturing companies. Don't get a lot from Alabama, but good stuff is happening all over the place, right? And how people interpret taking care of employees can mean so many different things, but healthcare is so fundamental, and I'm sure it's just been, again, great for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, the third story this week comes from Microsoft, where last year they faced a lot of backlash when their chatbot Bing, their artificial intelligence powered chatbot Bing, went rogue. So, to address this bias, Microsoft has been embedding DEI within its AI teams and its systems. So, they're over 50% of the overall workforce is somehow racially and ethnically diverse, and they're really involving these folks in their AI systems to try to reduce bias in the output. So it's the way it's done. It's not done enough, but it's so important.
Yeah, I saw that one, and I will admit my eyebrows kind of were like, how's that going to go? Because the person creating the bias checker is creating the bias checker with their bias. And
Sure.
even if it's a committee, right, we're part of the reason we do things in teams is to check each other's biases. But my guess is that those biases may be different, but they're all likely from the same kind of group. If it is a very, very different global team with all different kinds of biases, then I feel like that might be better. But now we're kind of getting into how my book works, right? Is that is it a good intentioned thing, which is better than nothing sometimes, but it also can cause a lot of harm if you make a really big deal about having this bias checking thing that is then also US focused, or male centered, or white centered, or something like that. So you'd have to be really intentional and part of the language I use in the model in the book is to recognize problems you don't experience. And in order to do that, much to your point, Bernadette, you have to collaborate with other people and listen and make it intentionally as broad and diverse as possible. So I think it reminded me of like when Wikipedia first started, and I don't use the platform very often, but their community written articles or community written entries, I guess, and that cited who wrote which part. And it's very collaborative, but that doesn't make it a good source of truth.
Right.
But if you know it's not a good source of truth, but you know that it's also being monitored by a community, then it's like truer than completely false.
Yes, and those people in the community are very quick to re-edit and try to catch mistakes. It seems like it's a pretty intense community. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we definitely need committees in order to reduce bias. We need different perspectives in order to reduce bias, and all of that's going to help. But, you know, I guess it remains to be seen how this all shakes out for Microsoft, but I appreciate the intention. So we'll see how it all lands.
Yeah, that's ultimately all we can do. And even if you're trying something new, there's nothing wrong with trying something new. You just need to be able to kind of monitor and adjust what you didn't know, or maybe what you did have some forethought for. But that's important.
I agree. All right. The next story this week comes from Synchrony Financial, which is offering on-site therapy with a psychologist at the office. Employees can access up to 12 free sessions a year, addressing challenges like anxiety, relationship stress, work-life balance, etc. So it was initially requested by younger employees, but has become popular across all ages. Now, people are obviously overworking. Let's call out the elephant in the room, but it's still good.
I also like that it might reduce the stigma of getting mental health services if it just becomes available. I think that's important too. So interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we'll see. I'm sure that they are keeping people longer at the office. People were probably like leaving to go to therapy, and they're like, no. We got to have you stay here. So there's probably that component as well. Let's be honest. But
yeah,
I think it's ultimately almost doing good.
Right. One of the case studies it reminds me of is lunch yoga, where pre-COVID and even during COVID, it was like virtually offered to provide yoga for employees for health and wellness, balance, etc. And if it's not well thought out, it can cause lots of problems, to the point that people just stopped doing it instead of just trying to do it better.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So the next story this week comes from Pakistan, where the transgender community and the women's community has gained a vital service with the launch of SheDrives, a ride-sharing app serving trans people and women in Lahore. So with about 30,000 trans individuals in the city, this service is providing a safer alternative to public transport where harassment and discrimination are rampant.
Where is that not needed in the world, right?
Yeah, I agree. Well, on I think it's Lyft, you can specifically choose to try to match with a woman driver.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I wrote about that in a previous 5 things. But I love that this is offered now in Pakistan.
Nice. Yeah. And I mean, there is an interesting bias, positive or negative, that is related to who you think is going to be providing a good experience or a safer experience. So even, on my Uber app, do I want to have conversation and how do I want the temperature is also providing a service that I might want. I skip the questions because generally I would like a conversation, but I don't know who I'm talking to. So we'll find out. So
sure. Yeah, I agree. All right. So Jess, it has been awesome having you on the show this week. Can you share on this 100th episode where we're offering a new feature in 5 things in 15 minutes called Good Vibes to Go. Now, traditionally, I've offered a call to action. Now we're going to have 2 in the form of Good Vibes to Go. So I'll share mine in a minute. But Jess, what is your good vibe to go for folks?
Well, I would say you touched on it initially in one of your comments, and that is the importance of curiosity. And what I find fascinating is that we are totally in control of the level of curiosity we are bringing to the world. It's like a water faucet. And even if you just have it like at a slow trickle that makes like a cat happy, you're always looking for something that you don't already know. You're listening like you don't know the answers. You can find beauty and novelty and something new and interesting, but you're responsible for keeping the faucet open a little bit. So I would encourage some of us that might be working way too many hours to the point that they're providing services so we never have to leave, is what kind of curiosity can you do? What are you doing that you've never done before? What are you learning? And are you challenging yourself to keep the curiosity valve open so that you can be a better listener, create better community, embrace better things? So curiosity, that would be my tip.
Good vibe to go. All right, my good vibe to go is to get smarter in seconds by watching a YouTube series by Blair Amani. You can learn about Juneteenth in 90 seconds, Ramadan in 30 seconds, and about ADHD in a minute. So good vibes to go. Enjoy those. Check out those ideas. Check out those resources. And folks, Jess, your book comes out on October 8th, right? That's exciting.
October 8th. That's it. That's the big fancy launch date.
Well, folks, go get Jess's book. And Jess, how can folks get in touch with you?
You can go to almostdoinggood.com, or you're welcome to also go to myname.com. They kind of redirect to the same place. And I'm happy to connect on any of the social platforms, or just, holler out the window. Maybe you're close enough.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show. Always great talking to you. Have a great week, everyone. And if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a good week. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.